We are getting into the 3-step approach that I recommend to all the families when they have to jump into a parent-teacher conference. Sometimes the teacher requests this conference, and as a parent, you may not know what to do, how to approach it. So stick around, and we're going to get into these 3 proven steps that I give with all my families on how to walk through that parent-teacher conference so that both you and the teacher, but most importantly, your child, can get what they need from their school day. Okay, so your teacher requested a parent-teacher conference. Now what in the world? Before we get into the 3 steps, we're gonna back it up a little bit. I want you to check yourself, right? Mindset is everything when going into one of these meetings. Remember, your goal here is to get the most out of that 10, 15 minutes that your teacher has to give you so that your child can benefit the most. And also, so if you have anybody else, any other members of the team helping your child, so you can really get the most out of that conversation so that you can have all your team members on the same page. Here we go. I want you to come into the meeting knowing, thinking, believing that your teacher has the best intentions for your child, okay? Your teacher is going out of her way to request a meeting with you. The delivery may not be perfect, you may not like all the details, but know that she's coming to you from a very good place, and most likely she really needs you on the team so you guys can work together and help whatever the situation is. Second thing I always tell parents to keep in mind is parents, most of the time you have a choice as to which school you put your child in, right? There are public schools, there are charter schools that you can go to nowadays. If you're in a private school, you definitely chose the school you wanted your child to be in. That includes the culture, the environment, it includes the academic rigor, it includes the social circles. So keep that in mind. You chose the best school you could with the information you had at the time. So if the meeting, there seems to be a mismatch, maybe it's an environment, right? Keep that in mind. Say, look, I did the best I could at the time. Either I work with the conditions of the school, or maybe it's time for us to find another school, okay? But you really can't change the school. That's like a moot point. The efforts aren't going to be put in the best to help you or your child. So keep that in mind. You chose a school, environment, academic rigor, the good, the bad, and the ugly, okay? Okay, when you get to the meeting, first thing I want you to do is just listen. And when you think you're done listening, listen a little bit more. Let the teacher give you as much information as she can. I'm a huge fan of taking notes. I have a terrible memory, so I need to write little important things that I want to get out of the meeting and things that I get from the meeting. So you might want to jot down the 3 steps we're going to go over right now, right? So once I want you to listen, let the teacher say everything she has to say. They'll probably show you work samples. Ask, is there anything else you want me to know? And then again, you wait, okay? Then once the teacher is done, then you can get in there and start asking any questions about things you didn't understand. What does this look like? You want to get a clear picture. But step number 2 is I want you to ask questions. I want you to ask as many questions as you need to ask to get a full picture of what's going on, okay? The second kind of questions I want you to ask are, okay, Mrs. Smith, so, I can tell that we're having trouble with A, B, and C. What have you found? What have you done to help the student get through this struggle? What has worked? What hasn't worked, right? And that's important because right at this time, you as the parent are collecting data. You're not in the classroom. You have no idea how it works. What does it look like? How it feels? So I want you to collect data as to what's been working in the classroom, right? What hasn't been working in the classroom? What has Mrs. Smith tried, okay? Because that's gonna help you formulate your action plan. Like, how are you gonna help Mrs. Smith help your child? Are you gonna need to do anything outside of school? But without asking those questions, it's going to be super, super hard for you to know what the right next step is. So I wanted you to ask questions to clarify anything that the teacher brought up. I want you to ask questions as far as what's worked and what hasn't worked. And this last question, it's a doozy, friends. I want you to ask, what do you recommend that we do? How can we help? And then once again, you can pretty much guess what I'm going to say. I want you to stop and I want you to listen. Okay? At this point, Mrs. Smith is going to say, she might say, hey, I don't know. That's why I'm coming to you, because I don't know what else you should do. She might say, hey, I would really like to see you maybe get some additional information. Maybe she wants you to get additional testing. Maybe she wants you to bring an occupational therapist that specializes with school struggles so that you guys can get another team member on board, right? She might want you to help with basics, study skills, more like those executive functioning skills, help the student be organized, help the student know how to preview their notes, help the student learn how to prioritize what assignment to do. Maybe these are things that she mentioned she's doing in the classroom, but a lot of times, especially if your child's struggling with executive functioning skills, they need somebody at home to mirror what's going on in the classroom. So that's why those questions that you asked are going to be so valuable to you. She might recommend that you get extra help, maybe like a homework helper, a tutor. She might suggest that you kind of try and address it by addressing the child's behavior, maybe some kind of reward system, maybe some kind of punishments, right? Side note here, I would like to see you try those other things before we get into punishments, taking things away, making the child feel worse. They probably already feel bad enough at school. We want them to feel good about themselves so that they can feel more confident to do more good things. So I would really like that punishment consequence part to be the last thing that we try, right? So many times that's the first thing. Well, I'm going to tell you the exact opposite. I want that to be the last thing you try. That usually doesn't work anyways, because there's usually an underlying reason that your child is stuck, struggling, that Mrs. Smith is waving an SOS flag because she needs your help. So 3 steps. I want you to listen. I want you to ask lots of questions. And I want you then to have an action plan. So sometimes once she tells you what she needs you to do or what she thinks might help, guess what? Now it's balls in your court. You get to say, you know what? I'm going to process all of this and I'm going to get back to you by the end of the week via email. That's an action plan. The plan is, thank you. I'm going to get this information. I'm going to think about it and I'm going to respond to you what our next step is. Sometimes you can come up with a plan of action right there. Okay, great. Do you have any resources for a therapist to help us? Do you have any resources for study skills? But make sure before you leave that meeting, before the meeting ends, that you guys spend a chunk of time figuring out what the action plan is, because honestly, that's the most important piece, right? These parent-teacher conferences sometimes can be big emotions, a lot of feelings happen, and not a lot of action. So we want to make sure that the action plan is definitely part of this. Now I'm going to share with you here some things that I have actually recommended with my own children. One time I got called into the parent-teacher conference. This was my youngest. He wasn't paying attention. And I said, listen, can you make sure that you have him ask at least one question throughout the class? So I told him, I'm going to tell him at home and I want you to carry over it with here, because that's how we're going to know if indeed he's paying attention or not paying attention. So it was something very simple that let, in this case, it was my child, know that, hey, we realize you're having a hard time paying attention in this class. We realize this class is probably challenging. I think it was like social studies, but in Spanish. So it was a hard class. So this is how we're going to help you pay attention. We want you to ask one question every class period. The teacher and I communicated a little bit, and that seemed to kind of help him get through the hump and figure out how he can kind of hack his own brain. So when he's stuck and can't pay attention because the content is hard or it's in another language, it's not his first language, he can kind of help with getting that attention so that he can ask. So that's one sample of what you can do at the end of a parent-teacher conference. So I want you guys to let me know in the comments things you've done in parent-teacher conferences that have worked, and maybe some things you've tried in parent-teacher conferences that haven't worked. And if you happen to be a teacher, I would love for you to chime in the comments below what you think that parents can do to help when you request a parent-teacher conference. Another thing I have for you is there is a downloadable free sheet at the end of this video, and it will give you a summary of executive functioning skills that will really help you and your teacher decide, hey, these are the things that we really see them struggling with, so let's work on these so that they can get better. Also, watch the next video, and that's going to explain what in the world to do with this executive functioning sheet that you're going to get after this video. All right, friends, good luck with your parent-teacher conferences. Can't wait to hear how it goes.